He was a heroin addict by 12, a convicted felon by 15, and by 20, locked inside the blood-soaked walls of San Quentin prison. He didn't just flirt with death. He danced with it, every single day. This is not the story of an actor. It's the story of a man who was supposed to die in a cell, but instead became one of Hollywood's most feared faces. Before the tattoos, before the Hollywood lights, there was only darkness. Danny Trejo was born on May 16, 1944, in the Echo Park neighborhood of Los Angeles. From the very beginning, his world was tinted in the color of violence. His father, Dionisio, a construction worker and former boxer, had fists like bricks and a temper that lit like a match. Danny would later say, "Violence wasn't something I learned. It was something I inherited." His earliest memories weren't of cartoons or bedtime stories. They were of broken windows, shouting matches, and the heavy thud of fists on flesh. Danny was barely out of diapers when he saw his first street fight. By the time he was 7, he'd already learned how to throw a punch dart as a child. He worshipped his uncle Gilbert, a local gangster, heroin addict, and armed robber. Gilbert wasn't just Danny's idol, he was his mentor. It was Gilbert who first handed him a joint when he was just 8 years old. At 12, it was heroin. By 13, Danny was already strung out, a lost child, roaming a city that didn't care if he lived or died. But Danny didn't just fall into the darkness. He ran toward it. By the time most kids were learning algebra, Danny was learning how to rob people. He committed his first armed robbery before he was 15. The adrenaline rush, the feeling of power, it was intoxicating. But the drugs, they were everything. Heroin made him feel invincible. Invulnerability was addictive when you had nothing to lose. In his teens, Trejo bounced between juvenile halls and the streets. He was small, but vicious. He learned how to fight because he had to, not to win, but to survive. He once said, "In jail, I was either predator or prey. I never wanted to be prey." His record became a growing list of thefts, assaults, and drug charges. And every time he got out, he went right back to the only world he knew: needles, fists, and cold nights on cracked concrete. By age 20, Danny Trejo was a full-fledged criminal. His rap sheet read like a horror novel. But the most terrifying chapter hadn't been written yet. Not until the day he landed in the infamous San Quentin State Prison. Sometimes the most dangerous place in the world is the silence that follows chaos. When Danny Trejo stepped out of solitary confinement, something inside him was different. The rage was still there. The memories were still vivid. But for the first time, he questioned them. He questioned himself. He found himself attending a 12-step recovery program inside the prison. Not because he believed it would work, but because it was something to do. What he didn't expect was clarity. Step by step, word by word, he began to speak truths he had buried for decades. He talked about addiction, about anger, about pain. And through that vulnerability, he discovered strength. Not the kind that came from fists or fear, but the kind that came from facing his own reflection. That group saved his life, and he never forgot it. By the time Danny was released in the late 1960s, he had served over 11 years across multiple institutions. He walked out with no money, no job, no education, but he was clean. For the first time since childhood, his veins weren't filled with poison. His eyes weren't clouded by rage. He was free. But freedom, he soon learned, came with its own kind of prison. He worked as a laborer, a janitor, a gardener, anything to stay afloat and stay clean. He lived paycheck to paycheck, surrounded by the same neighborhoods, the same temptations, the same old ghosts. But he kept going, kept showing up, kept attending meetings, not just for himself, but for others. Danny became a sponsor for recovering addicts. He'd walk into jails, community centers, and basements, speaking to men who were still living the life he barely escaped. He didn't preach. He didn't sugarcoat. He just told the truth. His truth. And then in one of life's strangest turns, he was asked to show up at a movie set. Not as an actor, not even as an extra, but as a drug counselor. There was a young actor struggling on set. The production team didn't know what to do. Someone mentioned Danny. He came, spoke, and stayed. It was supposed to be one conversation. It turned into something no one expected. A director noticed him, his scars, his intensity. He didn't need makeup, he was the real deal. And before Danny knew it, he was in front of the camera. The man who once feared mirrors was now reflecting pain to the world through film. He never auditioned, he never chased the spotlight. In fact, he He didn't even want to be there. In 1985, Danny Trejo stepped onto the set of Runaway Train, a gritty action drama starring Jon Voight and Eric Roberts. He wasn't there to act, he was there to help. A young actor was battling cocaine addiction during filming, and Danny had been called in to keep him sober, to be a quiet shadow, a safety net. Nothing more. But fate doesn't ask for permission. As Danny walked through the set, tattooed, scarred, hard-eyed, a screenwriter noticed him. His name was Edward Bunker, a former convict turned novelist and screenwriter. Bunker didn't just see Danny, he recognized him. They had served time together at San Quentin. "Hey," Bunker said, "are you still boxing?" Danny laughed. "I still look like I can." Bunker nodded. "We need a guy like you, a real guy." That same day, Danny Trejo went from counselor to boxing coach to actor. He was cast on the spot, not for his acting, but for his authenticity. He trained Eric Roberts for the boxing scenes, and his presence on camera was undeniable. There was something raw about him, something real. In a town full of fakes, Danny Trejo couldn't pretend even if he tried. And so it began. Small roles at first, almost always playing thugs, inmates, gang members. He didn't mind. He was all of those things. Once in Death Wish 4, he was shot in a drive-by. In Bulletproof, he played a deadly enforcer. In Marked for Death, he was the silent killer in the shadows. Danny never had to get into character. The character had lived inside him for years. But behind every grimace, every growl, every threatening glance, there was something the audience couldn't quite explain. Truth, he wasn't acting. He was remembering. As roles multiplied, so did his fans. Directors loved him, not because he was perfect, but because he was impossible to replicate. Still, despite the growing fame, Danny remained grounded. He still sponsored addicts, still spoke in prison yards, still drove the same car long after he could afford something better. Hollywood had found its villain, but the man behind the mask was slowly becoming a hero. He played hundreds of nameless criminals, convicts, cartel soldiers, knife-wielding assassins. For years, Danny Trejo was Hollywood's go-to villain, the face of fear, rage, and retribution. But he wasn't just in the movies. He was the movie. And then the world met Machete. It started as a fake trailer, a brutal, overthought sequence, tucked between the double feature of Grindhouse, directed by Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez, a blood-soaked montage of revenge, blades, and explosions. At its center, Danny Trejo, shirtless, scarred, wielding a machete with merciless precision. Audiences went crazy. They didn't want it to be fake. They wanted more. And Robert Rodriguez listened. In 2010, Machete became a full-length feature, and for the first time in Hollywood history, a 66-year-old Mexican-American ex-convict was not just part of the story. He was the headline. Trejo wasn't a side character anymore. He was the action star, the anti-hero, a grim, unstoppable force of justice and vengeance. Machete wasn't sleek or polished. It was raw, brutal, unapologetically wild, just like Danny. He wasn't handsome in the Hollywood sense. He wasn't young. He wasn't clean-cut, and that's exactly why people loved him. Because Machete looked like the pain people carried. He moved like someone who'd been broken, put himself back together. He wasn't fiction. He was survival. Machete turned into a franchise. Machete Kills followed. A third was teased. Machete Kills in Space. It became a meme, a legend. Trejo was everywhere, on t-shirts, in cartoons, in comic books. He voiced characters in Call of Duty, Fallout, and Grand Theft Auto. He even appeared in Breaking Bad, or rather, what was left of him, decapitated, strapped to a tortoise in one of the show's most iconic scenes. But despite all the blood, explosions, and bravado, Trejo never forgot who he was. He still showed up to recovery meetings, still visited prisons, still reminded young men that the road to destruction isn't glamorous, it's lonely, brutal, and cold. Danny Trejo didn't become Machete. Machete became Danny Trejo. Danny Trejo made millions playing villains. But his greatest role wasn't on a movie screen. It was behind a kitchen counter, feeding people. In 2016, at an age when most actors slow down or fade away, Danny launched Trejo's Tacos, a small taco shop in the heart of Los Angeles. But this wasn't some Hollywood vanity project. This was personal. Trejo grew up hungry, literally. There were nights in his childhood when the only meal was what he could steal. The streets didn't serve food, and they didn't offer warmth. So when he finally made it, he opened his doors to everyone. Trejo's tacos was different. The food was bold, the decor electric, and the energy undeniable. But what stood out most? The people behind the counter. Danny made it his mission to hire the formerly incarcerated, recovering addicts, and those who had been told no by society over and over again. He didn't just create a business, he created second chances. Trejo expanded quickly from tacos to donuts, to coffee, to sauces, to a cookbook. His brand didn't just carry his name, it carried his redemption. And while the world snapped photos with him at red carpet premieres, Danny was still showing up to prisons, recovery centers, and juvenile halls. He wasn't just a symbol of change, he was a participant. He told his story again and again. The drugs, the violence, the prison years. Not to glorify them, but to show how far a man can rise once he stops destroying himself. In interviews, when asked about his success, Trejo doesn't list his movie credits. He talks about the 50-plus years of sobriety. He talks about the thousands of lives he's helped pull out of the gutter. He talks about service. Hollywood made him famous, but service made him whole. And perhaps the most incredible thing, Danny never changed who he was, he just changed where he was going. Danny Trejo's life is a contradiction. He is both the wound and the healer, the villain and the survivor, the cautionary tale and the redemption story. There is no Hollywood polish here, no neatly scripted rise to fame. His scars are real, his regrets, countless as pain, unforgettable, and yet, there's something hauntingly beautiful about a man who should have died 100 times, but chose to live for others. He doesn't walk with arrogance, he walks with weight, the weight of a past he never hides, the weight of lives he's changed simply by telling the truth. In his 80s, Danny still wakes up early, he still trains, he still shows up to meetings where men whisper their darkest thoughts, in rooms that smell like stale coffee and second chances. He still listens, still shares, still reminds them, you're not alone. You're never too far gone. That's the real legacy. Not Machete. Not the taco empire. Not even the movies. It's in the faces of men who didn't pick up a needle that night. In the letters he gets from inmates saying, you gave me hope when I had none. It's in the single mother who brings her kid to Trejo's tacos just to say, he doesn't know your movies, but I know your story saved me. And it's in you, the one watching this now, feeling something. Maybe pain. Maybe hope. Maybe both. Trejo's story isn't about being fearless. It's about being broken and still moving forward. One step, one breath, one choice at a time. Asterisk. Now, I want to hear from you. What did you feel during this story? Did Danny's journey surprise you, inspire you? Did you see a piece of yourself in his pain, or in his victory? Drop a comment below. Tell us your thoughts, your reactions, or even your own story. This is a space for truth, not perfection. And if this video meant something to you, if it made you stop, think, or feel something real, give it a like. Subscribe for more stories like this one, raw, true, and unforgettable. Because behind every scar is a story worth hearing.